وافانا بحسنه حيانا نور الهدى وافانا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My dear viewers, welcome to Imam's Corner once again. Inshallah, in today's lesson we are going to be speaking about revelation. As we all know that Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the Quran by means of revelation. The word for revelation in Arabic is wahi. So first of all, we need to understand the importance and the need of wahi. Because we just made mention that the Quran came down through wahi. So if we study our own life and we study the domain in which Allah Almighty has placed us right now, we come to know that there are many different makhluqat, creations of Allah Almighty that are sharing the same domain. And if we want to live a good life in this world, there are two things that we need to know of. Number one, the objects that surround us, we need to know the usage of it. What is good for us and what is bad for us. If we study the verses in Surah Al-Baqarah in which Allah Almighty speaks about Adam alayhi salatu wassalam and granting him the viceroy of earth, we realize that Allah Almighty says to the malaika, to the angels, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, that the domain in which we are going to send you, you are going to know the names of everything. And because of that, you are given excellence over the malaika. Meaning that Adam alayhi salatu wassalam was given the ilm, the knowledge when he came into this world, and through that knowledge he knew what was good for him, what was bad for him. Or we can say he knew how to extract the best from the planet or the domain in which Allah Almighty sent him. So what I'm trying to say is that when a person comes into this world, slowly and gradually he realizes what is beneficial and what is harmful. But the second aspect is more important. There has to be rules and regulations that inform this person where to stop and where to move on. Because many a times a person may think that something is beneficial. Outwardly it is beneficial, but it may not be beneficial in the long run. So there has to be an authority that has greater knowledge than the human being, that can inform this human being that yes, there is benefit in this, or there is harm in this, but this is where you need to stop and this is where you need to move on. So Allah Almighty created the human being, but when He created the human being and sent him in this world, He created three extra things. Number one, the senses. So for example, Allah Almighty gives the human being the ability to touch and gain knowledge, the ability to look and acquire knowledge, the ability to smell, the ability to taste. So these are senses that Allah Almighty has created when creating the human being. And through these senses, a person acquires knowledge. He determines that this is good for him or this is bad for him. But as we all know, that these senses have limitations. They do not give us guidance in every single avenue because they have limitations. For example, the kitab that is in front of me, I can see it and acquire the knowledge that this is a kitab. I can touch it and I can acquire the knowledge that this is a paper. I can look at the place where I'm sitting and acquire a certain knowledge. But if I was to use my senses to acquire the knowledge of how this book came into existence, my senses will be exhausted, but they cannot give me that knowledge. So what Allah Almighty has done, He has given us a higher level of knowledge. The three things that have been created, first is the five senses, and then above that comes the reason, the intellect, the aql. So now the aql will intervene and say to the human being, yes, this book came into existence because there was a person who basically acquired knowledge and put that knowledge on paper with a qalam, with a pen and with ink. And this is how this book came into existence. So the aql now gives guidance to the human being. Basically guidance at that junction where the five senses give up and say that this is beyond our knowledge. So there's limitations to the senses. Likewise, there are limitations to the aql. The third thing that Allah Almighty created, that we as people of belief believe that is absolute and complete knowledge, is the knowledge that comes to us through revelation, directly from Allah Almighty. And this knowledge that comes to us through revelation, through wahi, is a greater level of knowledge than the knowledge that we acquire through our intellect and knowledge that we acquire through our senses. For example, if our aql tells us something that this is good for us, but wahi, revelation, tells us it is not good for us, we need to disregard the knowledge that comes to the aql, because the knowledge that has come to us through revelation is greater. And this is the problem that has existed from the time Adam alayhi salatu wasalam came in this world till today. That a very large group of humanity consider, believe that aql is the last creation of Allah Almighty through which we acquire knowledge. It is absolute and concrete. But people of faith say no. There is a source of knowledge that is greater than the knowledge that is acquired by the intellect, and that is wahi, that is revelation. Because revelation comes from Allah Almighty, and Allah Almighty is the creator of the human being and the creator of the senses and the creator of the aql. So there is a need of wahi, revelation, because we will only extract the best from this world and from life when we have absolute and concrete knowledge. And that absolute knowledge comes to us through revelation, through wahi. Now the journey of wahi is the second topic that we are going to discuss in this lesson. Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the final prophet of Allah Almighty that receives revelation. Meaning that from the time the Nabi of Allah departed this world, no one is going to receive wahi, revelation. There is a hadith in Bukhari. Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa radiyallahu ta'ala anha says that Hazrat Harith bin Hisham, he asked Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam that, Ya Rasulullah, how do you receive revelation? How do you receive revelation? And Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that I receive revelation And the sound of revelation is like the ringing of bells. The sound of revelation is like the ringing of bells. And then the Nabi of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the end of this hadith, he makes mention that this form of revelation is the hardest upon me. Now, many scholars, for example, Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, rahimahullah, make mention the wisdom behind the ringing of bells. That why did Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam compare the experience of receiving revelation with the ringing of bells? If we analyze the ringing of bells, first of all, we realize that it is continuous. It is perpetual. The sound does not break. So first we learn from this that when Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to receive revelation, the revelation used to be continuous, perpetual. The second nuqta, fine point that we extract from the ringing of bells is that when the bells ring, it is near to impossible to determine the direction, because the sound is from all directions. So there's a hidden gem in this, that this revelation that Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is receiving, that is compared to the ringing of bells, will not be only for the Arab Peninsula, it will be for the entire world, kafatan linnas, for every single human being. So it is not confined to one direction, to the right or to the left, but it will cover the entire dunya. This is an understanding of Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi and many other scholars like him. Now, Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa radiyallahu ta'ala anha says that when the Nabi of Allah used to experience the receiving of revelation, you could see that his body language and the color of his face used to change, because there was great pressure. And because of that pressure, in winter the Nabi of Allah used to perspire. In winter, the Nabi of Allah used to perspire. There's one very famous Sahabi by the name of Hazrat Zayd bin Thabit radiyallahu ta'ala an. He's one of the great scholars amongst the Sahaba. And one fine day, he was sitting, and what a blessed moment that Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had placed his head on the lap of Zayd bin Thabit radiyallahu ta'ala an. And at that moment, Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received revelation. Hazrat Zayd bin Thabit radiyallahu ta'ala an said that the weight intensified. So the weight intensified, and it seemed like that his legs will be crushed. His legs will be crushed. This was the pressure that Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam experienced at the time of revelation. And it has been made mention that many a times when the Nabi of Allah was on an animal traveling, and at that moment the Nabi of Allah used to receive revelation, the animal used to collapse and drop to the ground. Could not carry the weight of the Nabi of Allah, because it was not the weight of the Nabi of Allah, it is the weight of revelation. I would like to pause here and draw your attention that revelation that made our Nabi of Allah perspire, that revelation that was felt by Zayd bin Thabit, and his words were that my legs were to crush, that revelation is in front of us. So we are very fortunate, very lucky, benefit from the Quran. Wahi is our need, revelation is our need. We cannot survive and we cannot extract the best from this world without the absolute form of knowledge, that is revelation. The Mufassirun have made mention that there were other ways in which the Nabi of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received revelation as well. The second form was that the angel, the archangel Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam, used to come in the form of a human being. Normally, most of the time, he used to come in the form of Hazrat Dahya bin Kalbi, who was a very, very handsome Sahabi. Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that when revelation used to come to me in this mode, it was the easiest upon me. So we spoke about the hardest and we spoke about the easiest. And there are many other modes, but we will not discuss them in this lesson. So one is the hardest mode upon the Nabi of Allah, and that is the ringing of bells. And when that episode of receiving revelation used to end, the entire revelation was known to the Nabi of Allah. It was printed upon his heart. Nuzzila ala qalbik. The Quran descended upon the heart of Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he did not forget. And the easiest was when the angel used to disguise himself as a human being and relate, convey the message of Allah Almighty, the revelation to Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Another aspect pertaining to wahi: when did Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam receive the Quran, receive this revelation? And where did it come from? Of course, we know it came from Allah Almighty. So first of all, there is a verse in Surah Al-Buruj, Surah number 85. And it is the last verses of this surah, verse number 21, 22, in which Allah Almighty says, بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ مَجِيدٌ فِي لَوْحٍ مَحْفُوظٍ. That the Quran, the revelation, is preserved in the preserved tablets. So the ulama have understood that the descending of the Quran from the preserved tablets took twice. So this descending took twice. It was not once, it was two times. So the first time the Quran came down from the preserved tablets, it came down to Baytul Ma'mur, or you can say Baytul Izzah. And this is the blessed area over and above the Kaaba where we visit in Makkatul Mukarramah, above that. So there is a Kaaba there as well, a dignified house where the Malaika, the angelic, the celestial world, they come and they perform their tawaf. So the entire Quran-e-Majid came down in one go from Lawh-e-Mahfuz to Baytul Ma'mur. And this descending took place on the night of power, Laylatul Qadr. This is known as Inzal. This is known as Inzal. Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatil Qadr. So Allah Almighty is alluding to that. Then the second time the Quran came down, it came down upon Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and according to most of the scholars, the second descending of the Quran from Baytul Ma'mur took place in the night of power once again. So it came down upon Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that journey continued for the next 23 years. So when Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam reached the age of 40, he received the first revelation. And when Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam became 63, that was the last revelation that he received. And the entire Quran was given to the Nabi of Allah in these 23 long years. Now, why did Allah Almighty, and this second descending of the Quran from Baytul Ma'mur is known as Tanzeel. So one is Inzal. Inzal means in one go, and Tanzeel means bit by bit. So the second time the Quran came down upon Nabi Akrim Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, upon his heart, it took 23 long years. So why did the Quran come down in two goes? One from Lawh Mahfuz to Baytul Ma'mur, and then from Baytul Ma'mur upon the blessed heart of Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the ulama, they make mention that there is a fine point in that, and that is to tell you, to tell everyone that the Quran is not only preserved in the blessed heart of Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but it is preserved at two other junctions. One is in Lawh Mahfuz, and second is Baytul Ma'mur. And that's why the second chapter of the glorious Quran, known as Suratul Baqarah, starts with ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. That this book, there is no doubt in it. It is preserved in the heart of Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and it is preserved in the preserved tablets, and it is preserved in Baytul Ma'mur. Another verse I would like to discuss at this point, and that is the verse from Suratul Furqan, Surah number 25, verse number 32, in which Allah Almighty says, وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْلَا نُزِّلَ عَلَيْهِ الْقُرْآنُ جُمْلَةً وَاحِدَةً. The people of Mecca, they asked Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that why don't you receive the entire revelation in one go? Why are you receiving that revelation bit by bit? So they had a understanding, they thought that Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam goes in the night and is educated by somebody, and these words are not revelation. So Allah Almighty, in a very subtle manner, makes mention, كَذَلِكَ لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. We do this so it gives solace to your heart. The very famous Mufassir, the Mufassir of Tafseer Kabir, Imam Razi, he makes mention why the Quran came down upon the Nabi of Allah in 23 long years. And he makes mention of a few points that I would like to share with you. Number one, if the entire Quran was given to the Nabi of Allah in one go, from the time the Nabi of Allah received the entire Quran, every order of the Quran had to be practiced. And this would be very, very hard upon the companions, the Sahaba, the region. So the Quran came bit by bit in small parts. So it was easy for the Sahaba to make adjustment in their life. And by the time the entire Quran was received by the Nabi of Allah and read to the Sahaba, each verse was in the life of the Sahaba. For example, we know that there were 3 verses that came down in relation to alcohol. But if the entire Quran came down in one go, as we know that the drinking of alcohol is an addiction, it would be very, very hard for the companions to give it up. So Allah Almighty sent down the verses, and there was a time period between those verses that gave the Sahaba the time frame to abstain and to give up that addiction. The second hikmah, the second point that Imam Razi makes mention of, and it is a very interesting point why the Quran came down in 23 years, is that Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam on a daily basis was criticized by his people. They used to hurt him by speech and by action. And Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam needed words of comfort. So the Quran used to come down bit by bit. And whenever Allah Almighty used to speak to Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that used to give him comfort at that moment, and it used to allow him to forget the pain that was coming to him by his people. And the third reason that Imam Razi makes mention of, he says that many a times people used to come to the Nabi of Allah and ask questions, or many a time something used to happen, or many a time something was to happen. So the verses that came down were basically a jawab, a response to the question, or the verse was pertaining to something that was to happen, or the verse was pertaining to guidance of how to deal with the matter at that moment. So if the Quran was given in one go, known as inzal, it will defeat the purpose. It will not allow the Nabi of Allah to receive solace at the time when needed, and it will not be a response to the question that the people are asking at that moment. So these are a few understandings pertaining to why the Quran came down upon Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in 23 long years. I would like to make mention of the cause of revelation. Inshallah, when we study the Quran and we make the tafseer of the Quran, you will hear the word not once but many a times, and that will be Shan-e-Nuzul or Sabab-e-Nuzul, meaning the cause of revelation. So the scholars have understood that when we study the entire Quran, there are two types of verses. Many verses are those that Allah Almighty sent down on His own. So there was nothing that basically was behind that verse. Allah Almighty sent it down on His own. And many a times there are verses that have a backdrop, a cause of revelation. And the Arabic word for cause of revelation is sabab-e-nuzul. Something happens and then Allah Almighty sends down the verse. For example, Nabi Kareem Muhammad is in the Kaaba. It is the conquest of Makkah, Fatah Makkah. The Nabi of Allah is in the Kaaba. The keys have been given to him by Uthman. And outside, Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Abbas are desiring that the Nabi of Allah hand the key to him, or the key to them. So Nabi Kareem Muhammad comes out and recites the verse from Surah An-Nisa, verse number 58, Inna Allaha ya'murukum an tu'addul amanati ila ahliha. That Allah Almighty has ordered us that we give the trust to the person that it is due to. So this verse was received by the Nabi of Allah in the Kaaba. The cause was that there were people that were interested to become the custodians of the Kaaba, like Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala and Hazrat Abbas. Allah Almighty forbade that and said to the Nabi of Allah, return this key to the previous custodian that will remain the custodian until the Day of Judgment. So this is known as the cause of revelation. Right at the end, to close this lesson, I would like to make mention of Makki and Madani. Many a times when we open the Quran, we find the titles Makki and Madani. So basically, a Makki surah or a Makki ayat is that surah and that ayah that Nabi Kareem Muhammad received before arriving in Madinatul Munawwara. Received before that. And Madani surah or ayat is that surah and ayah that Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received after migration. The verse that I just recited a few moments ago from Surah An-Nisa, Surah number 4, verse number 58, Inna Allaha ya'murukum an tu'addul amanati ila ahliya. This ayat is a Madani ayah, but it was received in Makkah, in the Kaaba. But why is it a Madani ayah? Because it was received after migration. It was received after migration. Even if it was received by the Nabi of Allah in Makkah, but it is received after migration, it will be considered as Madani. And if it is received before migration, it is known as Makki. Now, Surah Al-Muddathir, Surah number 74, is the surah, the complete surah is Makki. And Surah Ali Imran, Surah number 3, the complete surah is Madani. Sometimes you will find that the surah is titled as Makki, but there may be a few verses in there as Madani. Or you will find that there is a surah that is titled as Madani, but there's a few verses that are known as Makki. And it gives us an understanding of the domain in which the ayat is received by Nabi Kareem Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a major difference between the Makki and the Madani surahs. We don't have time for that. I would like to conclude by saying that according to most of the scholars, there's 86 or 87 surahs that are known as Makki, and the remaining surahs are Madani. The Madani surahs are very, very long compared to the Makki surahs that are very, very short. A recap of what we have discussed today. We had made mention that, number one, that an insan has been created, and once he was created, three things were created for him to acquire knowledge. One is the senses, number two is the reason, the intellect, and number three is wahi, revelation. And revelation is the absolute knowledge that allows a person to understand what is right and what is wrong, and allows him to benefit from this world. Then we made mention that Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam received revelation in 23 long years, and it has been made mention in Sahih al-Bukhari that one Sahabi asked the Nabi of Allah, what is the experience of receiving revelation? And Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, it's like the ringing of bells, and this is the hardest mode of receiving revelation. We made mention why the Nabi of Allah compared this with the ringing of bell, the understanding of Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Then we made mention that there was a second mode of receiving revelation, and that is when the Jibreel, the angel, used to come as a human being and give revelation to Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This mode was the easiest upon Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Then we made mention that the Quran came down twice, one from the preserved tablets to Baytul Ma'mur. This is known as Inzal, and then the second descending of the Quran from Baytul Ma'mur, Nuzzila ala qalbik, upon the heart of Nabi Kareem Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and this took 23 long years. This is known as Tanzil. Then we made mention that why did the Quran come down in 23 long years? Why not all together? And we made mention of the understanding of Imam Razi, and number one is that it came down bit by bit so it could give solace to the Nabi of Allah. Number two, so it was easy for the Sahaba to implement the Quran bit by bit. And then we made mention that there were many questions that people used to ask, and the Quran used to respond to those questions. Then we made mention that there's Makki and Madani surahs. Majority of the Quran is Makki, the remaining is Madani. Another fine detail is that Makki surahs speak about Tawheed, Risala and Akhirah, and Madani surahs speak about injunctions and laws and rules. Allah Almighty allow each one of us to inculcate what we have heard today. Inshallah, the next lesson next week, inshallah, will be the start of Surah Naba. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
نور الهدى وفانا بحسنه حيانا نور الهدى